Hey folks, Alamandic here, the Hot Rod Hippie. This is C10 Build vlog number 7, I believe. I'm losing track at this point. But what I'm working on today, I'm gonna mock up the intake manifold on the LS engine in the C10. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean off the workbench right now so we can go ahead and put this intake manifold together. And I just need to get cleaned up, reset, start again. I'm gonna talk about why it is that I'm moving from working on the front end sheet metal to putting an intake manifold on the engine now while I'm cleaning up here. So let's get to this. So the reason that I need to get this thing on here is I need to be able to plan this project moving forward. Taking a break from working on the sheet metal now seems like it's setting me behind, but it's gonna get me ahead for the next projects that are coming. When it comes time to wire the engine, when it comes time to plumb the fuel system and to build the cold air intake, I need to know that I have all the parts on hand so I'm not gonna be waiting around twiddling my thumbs when I go to do that work. Everything always comes back to having a plan, and I need to plan today so that next week I can be productive. Okay, so that is the truck intake manifold. It's, I think it's hideous anyway. Plastic fuel rails on the thing, the plastic Vortec cover on the top of it, the plastic intake manifold itself. The whole thing is just, it wasn't designed for looks, and that's understandable. It was meant to be in pickup trucks. I just don't want it in this pickup truck. Now, to get away from that ugly intake manifold and technically possibly pick up a few horsepower, though honestly not nearly enough to justify the expense of this changeover, we are moving to this intake manifold. Now this is the intake manifold we're gonna be running on this truck. This is generally, most people call it the SpeedMaster intake, but basically it's a Chinese intake. It's just a cheapy eBay purchase. This was the cheapest manifold I was able to purchase for this thing that was gonna gain us both performance and a better look. That said, the casting quality of it is pretty much garbage and needs plenty of cleanup. Maybe even a coat of paint. Maybe this will end up not being bare aluminum. We'll decide that later on. The truck is gonna end up possibly either silver or kind of a babyish blue color with white accents somewhere. So I'm thinking maybe white on the intake manifold. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. We are also swapping to a drive-by cable throttle body, also an eBay throttle body here. The throttle body, however, is definitely a better looking part than the intake manifold is. The only thing I've noticed about the throttle body I don't like is this here kind of freely turns, and that could cause a slight air leak, so I may pull that out of there, tap it, and plug it yet. Let's get this intake set up together. So I got the fuel rails started to install on here. I started installing them, got them all lined up, and then I realized the brackets that come with the fuel rails weren't gonna work with this intake manifold. I largely expected this, and this is the joy of the aftermarket automotive world. I've got Holley fuel rails and I got a SpeedMaster intake manifold. The two parts don't bolt together. Bolt-on parts are not bolt-on parts most of the time. This is understandable that the Holley rails wouldn't be exactly designed to fit with this intake manifold. The only ones that I could find for this manifold were hideous red ones, whereas I wanted either black or a natural aluminum look. So I had to pick up these ones from Holley. Here are the brackets that come with the fuel rails. Now they're intended to bolt in this sort of orientation, up underneath of here, and then catch a boss much like that one. I was able to modify 2 of them to work here. The ones that I modified, instead of installing them like this, I installed them like this because the boss is actually pretty much level with the bottom of these fuel rails. Basically, I flattened each of these steps out, so this is almost flat, but not quite because they're not at the exact same angle. And then I re-drilled one hole in this bracket, and I'm only using one of the bolt locations on the fuel rail to install the rails to the manifolds, but I'm okay with that. The other 2 are a little more complicated. They are pretty much lined up. This boss is lined up with where the bolt location is, so I had to more heavily modify the second set of brackets. Again, you can see how I mostly flattened it out, but slight different angle change. I drilled one new hole and cut off the ear of the tab, and then I drilled one more new hole out here at the end. I really hate the way that looks, but it's underneath the fuel rail, so you won't see it, so it is what it is. These will have to get painted to match, and that'll come later on. For right now, I just need to get this on here. Now, these are the things that I run into constantly as a car builder. The times where these parts just don't want to bolt together. What am I going to do? And it's my experience that tells me to just tackle it, go ahead and figure out something else, because I'm not going to be able to get rails that bolt directly onto this. Maybe I could, but it would take me days, weeks to get them. It's just not worth my time. So now I've got the fuel rails bolted on there. I'm happy with that. Throttle body's on here, and I discovered the next problem that I have. You see, this 95mm throttle body that I purchased came with a TPS and an IAC. So a sensor I need and an idle air control motor. Excellent. It came with the bolts to bolt the throttle body to the intake manifold. It didn't come with the bolts to install these sensor and motor onto the throttle body though. I just had to order those separately. Come on. I ended up buying a bolt kit. I was actually able to get a bolt kit for these specific things from C10 Build, where I've gotten more than a handful of parts for this build from. And there is the intake on the engine. Now, as I said earlier, my primary reason for doing this is I wanted to mock up the intake and see what I was going to need in here. Now that I've got this intake on here, I thought this throttle body would be farther back, so I have more room than I realized I was going to. Now here's the elbow in question. It's going to go somewhere right around here with a filter right over in this area. Now this isn't nearly as cold air intake or special as I would normally like to make one of these things. Unfortunately, with the way that the inner fenders rise really high in this thing and the limited amount of time that I have, that's just gonna have to be on this one, unfortunately. The only other option I have is I could maybe build something that intakes air from these front grille areas here, but that would require kind of engineering something that would duct the air up and over the core support or past the radiator. That's getting a little complicated. While I would normally love that challenge, and I'm kind of disappointed that I'm not going to get that challenge in this project. On this one, I just don't have the time, unfortunately. So it's going to have to be this kind of not what I want air intake now. This all kind of boils down to plan. I figured out what I need to do. I've got a game plan in mind. I ordered materials and bolts and things so that I can go ahead and create what I'm trying to create. And it's all just about keeping moving and keeping rolling and knowing what the next thing is. I've wasted time that I could have spent today working on the sheet metal of this truck. But now this wasted time allows me so that when I get later on to actually building the intake and actually building the fuel lines and everything, I have everything I need. I'm not going to be wasting time then. It's the way projects go a lot of the time when you're building a car. Some people complain that when I make these videos that I'm not doing enough hands-on work. Well, sometimes building a car isn't all hands-on work. In fact, a lot of the time it's not all hands-on work. It's a lot of research. It's a lot of sitting down and putting together part lists and ordering up the right components for things and getting the right dimensions on everything, measuring to make sure you're ordering the right length of bolts and size of tubing. All of this stuff matters. And then you run into things like where these bolts for this throttle body, I didn't have all the bolts that I needed for it. So I had to find what size bolts those are and order those. All these things play into building a car. So I just want to show you the real world situation of actually building something. I thought some folks at least would appreciate that. I want to make a few quick notes about the intake. You can see it's not on there at the moment. I've come across a couple of things since I started filming about this thing, and then some people had some questions online, so I just figured I'd tack these little side notes in here. I had one fitment issue with the intake fitting on this engine. This engine has a valley cover in there that has the knock sensors inside of it. It has these bolts in there originally. They're not that high profile of a head, but they were hitting the underside of the intake manifold. So I installed button head stainless steel fasteners in place of these so they're a lower profile design and allow the intake to sit down on it. I didn't have the gaskets between the heads and the intake, so that could be contributing to the situation that I was running into, but I figured I should make a note of that for you folks. Also, I should note those black plugs and the wire that you see there, that is the knock sensors on this engine. They are down underneath the valley cover. On this thing, I'm going to be replacing those before the intake manifold gets final installed. We're a long way off from that. But these are a common failure point on these engines, as is the wiring that goes to them. It can get chafed on the underside of the intake manifold. So all of that is going to get replaced before this thing is done. It'll save me trouble down the road. Another note is this right here. Some folks asked where the map sensor installs, because usually the map sensor on the intakes of LS applications and such it's up here on top of the manifold somewhere or toward the front. On this one, it's going to be at the back here, installs right there. I haven't installed it yet. That bolt looks like I almost need to drill and tap it to install the bolt retainer for it. I don't know yet. All right, folks, that's going to wrap it up for this one. I hope you found this video interesting. If you did, please go ahead and drop it a like. Let me know in the comments down below. What do you think of that intake manifold? Is it ugly? Do you like it? Let me know what you're thinking in the comments down below. Check out the Patreon account, patreon.com/HotRodHippie. That directly supports this channel. Get subscribed to keep up to date with all the Hot Rod Hippie content. Thanks for coming around, folks.